Well, it's been the day of the fight back. Keir Starmer absolutely laying into Peter Mandelson as a serial liar.
He portrayed Epstein as someone he barely knew. And when that became clear, and it was not true, I sacked him. Such deceit is incompatible with public service. Let me be clear, no one is above accountability. And no one, however well connected, however experienced, however senior, should hold public office if they cannot meet the basic test of honesty.
Very good words. But will words be enough? As I said yesterday, I also think the Prime Minister is a decent person who entered public life for the right reasons. Being lied to is not a capital offence. But naivety, when your Prime Minister, is pretty serious. Let's be clear. The country is freshly disgusted by the Mandelson affair, doesn't want to listen to Starmer, and the country remains disgusted by the way the Tories behaved when they were in power. And so today, the obvious conclusion, the overwhelming likelihood, is that we are heading towards a plague on both their houses' election and a reform government. What, short of resigning, can Starmer now do to save himself and to save Labour? Well, he must stop disdaining politics and start to think harder about what real politics means. Example, he said today he wanted the country to be fairer, safer and more secure. But the politics of Peter Mandelson, who he now regards as the viper he took to his bosom, is all about the interests of the super-rich, the corporate bankers, the big American tech companies digging themselves ever deeper into our public life. It wasn't New Labour or Blue Labour or Old Labour, it was anti-Labour. The Mandelson affair wasn't just about one guy making a mistake about another guy. It was about the arrogance and the entitlement of the privileged them, and these days the increasingly furious us. And that is why, even though Epstein was deeply involved in the far right across Europe and the Russians, populism has not yet been set back by this affair. It may be unfair, but Nigel Farage remains in a very strong position, and we are heading for wild political upsets. And it's not just about one man's greed or lies, as the Prime Minister suggested today. It's about profound social unfairness. It's time, as somebody said once, to get back to basics. But is it even possible these days to take on the biggest corporate interests? Well, this week the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said he would ban social media for children, calling it a place of addiction, abuse, pornography, manipulation and violence. Elon Musk responded almost immediately, "Dirty Sanchez is a tyrant and a traitor to the people of Spain." Taking on the big guys means being ready for some proper fights. And in that spirit, let's talk all of this through with somebody who has perhaps a slightly different perspective from me, the former Conservative Minister and Spectator editor, Lord Michael Gove. Michael, great to have you on the show. Let's start with the thought that the general mood in the country is pretty much a plague on both your houses, and that reform remain very, very well placed to form the next government.
The mood is sulphurous. A PR firm called Charlesby has published some focus groups today, which I think chime with what anyone who's out there reporting, or indeed anyone who is out there on the doorstep campaigning in the local elections, will find, which is anger with the political class as a whole. And the fury that was directed at my party, at the Tories in 2024, is now being directed against all established politicians. And that doesn't mean that people see Nigel Farage as a Sir Galahad figure. They know that he's tainted and compromised as well, but they think that he is, at the moment, the best of a bad bunch.
They just want change at any price. Let me ask you about what I was saying there about Peter Mandelson representing big corporate interests, because it wasn't just the stuff that he was leaking from Gordon Brown's cabinet to Epstein and therefore to Wall Street. It was also, his very, very deep involvement with Palantir and many of the big companies. And there's always been this strain in New Labour, which was leaning far more to the super rich than it was to the original Labour base.
There are two elements which you are absolutely right to pick up on. The first is that Peter Mandelson felt that a Labour government always had to be associated with success. success, that a Labour government that was continually on the side, or perceived to be on the side of the poor, the downtrodden and the excluded, would remain out of office. And that in order to be comfortable with office, you needed to be comfortable with and attractive to power brokers, i.e. the wealthy, worldwide. But obviously he took this politically and personally way beyond what anyone might consider to be prudent. But the second point about tech is, I think, another aspect of Mandelson. Modernisation will always be associated with him. And one of his concerns when he was ambassador about Labour overall is that Labour's economic policy, and indeed Britain's economic policy, risked seeming backward-looking. That Britain and a Labour government had to lean in to the tech changes, to the AI revolution.
And this is why so many Labour MPs are kind of livid about the influence that he's had for so long. Now, I'm not making any silly points here, but you were one of many people who at the time thought this was a good appointment as ambassador. Let's talk about that, because it wasn't a ridiculous view at the time. He was somebody who spoke the language of Trump's Washington.
There's egg on a lot of faces at the moment, and there's a few scraps of yolk and albumin on mine, because I thought that, given the range of people who were available, that this was a sensible choice, because I thought, given the Trump White House, given the importance of the Anglo-American relationship, given his skill, undoubted skill as a minister, and his experience as an EU commissioner, this was a good choice. And I think, and here, of course, I'm a Tory, but here I do have some sympathy with the position that Keir Starmer finds himself in. Those around Starmer will have said that this choice was a risk, but it was a risk where Mandelson's experience and his ability was known. What was also known was his unreliability, but what was unknown was the scale of the activity and the intimacy with Epstein at the time he was appointed. There were some people who rang the alarm bell.
The Financial Times, to be fair to them.
The FT and Maurice Glassman both sounded the alarm bell, but I was as gullible a duck swept along by the tide in the SW1 pond as any.
And so we come to the events of this morning when the Prime Minister, sounding as visibly angry, if you can sound visibly, but you know what I mean,
yes,
being as angry as I have heard him for a long time, says again and again, this man was a liar, a liar, a liar. I was lied to. And the implication is you can't blame me for being lied to. Do you think that's a sufficient defence?
I sympathise with the position in which he finds himself, but there's a difference between my own personal sympathy and trying to be objective about the public reaction. Because people will think, well, you're the Prime Minister, you should have had access to this information. You should have known that he was unreliable. There were career diplomats whom you could have appointed. At the very least, you were too clever by half and favoured Labour's interests or your own clique's interests over the national interest. At worst, your judgment has once again proved to be deficient, and deficient in a way which a belated apology now will not efface.
Too many mistakes, too many misjudgments at this point. We've both, but you in particular, you've seen the fall of a few prime ministers. We've been told by some people that this is the Pincher moment, as it were, before the fall of Boris Johnson. In other words, that Keir Starmer is in the last phase of his prime ministership. Do you think that's true?
It's impossible to know at the moment. There are very few people who, in their hearts, believe that of all the available talent, that Keir Starmer is undoubtedly the person who should be Labour leader. The number of people who are, you will know as well
genuine
as I do,
Starmer people.
Enthusiastic, ardent Starmerites is small. Chris Ward, Nick Thomas-Symonds, 15, 20 people within the Parliamentary Labour Party. However, there is no consensus about who the successor should be. The most able member of the cabinet, Shabana Mahmood, is out of sympathy with Labour's grassroots opinion on a variety of issues.
You quite fancy, I use the word fancy in a purely political sense, Angela Rayner.
Yes, well, I think that Angela Rayner has real political sort of instincts which are conspicuously absent in the way in which Keir Starmer has operated. We saw that over welfare reform, where she got the coals out of the fire for Starmer and Reeves, and yesterday, where she effectively prevented Labour MPs from rebelling by coming forward with an uncomfortable but necessary compromise. So I do think that she has that raw political skill, but in her case, there is still some unfinished business with HMRC over the tax arrangements relating to her flat in Brighton.
And I'm absolutely sure the deep state is sitting inside the HMRC office saying, no, not yet. Hold on, not yet.
Well,
see.
HMRC
Anyway.
are famously resistant to any political pressure, but who knows?
I was joking, HMRC. Don't come after me. Don't come after me.
But again, it's an oversimplification. But you have a broad left and a broad centre-right within the Labour Party, and the centre-right generally would consider to be West Streeting their champion. But he is harmed, not his fault, but harmed by association with Mandelson, having been seen as Mandelson's protégé. And then on the left, you have Burnham out of Parliament, Angela Rayner waiting for the HMRC disclosure.
There is no obvious candidate at the moment, which is very good for Keir Starmer.
And just very briefly, Ed Miliband doesn't want to do it, I understand, but he may be that there is a move behind him. And then there's a dark horse, Yvette Cooper, whose experience and relative sure-footedness means that if there were a determined effort to find someone around whom Labour could unite other than Starmer, it might be her. But given the range of runners and riders that we've been through and the obstacles they face in this grand national, I actually think that Starmer may be around for longer than some think.
Michael Gove, absolutely fascinating. That is, of course, the key question. Starmer goes, who comes in?